While retirement is generally seen as a time of relaxation and self-focus, God calls us to love, serve, and help others for a lifetime. He has been preparing us for this retirement season literally our entire lives. In retirement, countless Christians enter a state of spiritual dormancy, not knowing how they are called to have an impact for God's kingdom. The Retirement Reformation seeks to encourage and empower the 50 million Christians approaching or in retirement to embrace the calling God has been preparing in them. When the world says it's time to stop, you can begin to have your greatest impact. Welcome to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation, where our goal is to journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him.
Reaching out to the 50 million Christ followers in America who are already in or fast approaching retirement. You've tuned into iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg, and I've got the founder of the Retirement Reformation in studio with us today, Bruce Bruinsma. Please check us out online, retirementreformation.org, retirementreformation.org. Of course, in the App Store, just look up Retirement Reformation. You know, Romans 12:2 is one of my favorite verses because it speaks to my soul. It says, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. When you put that into the perspective of retirement, this opens up a huge window of thought and an opportunity. And it means a whole lot of rejecting what the world is dishing out. Today, Bruce Bruinsma, the founder of the Retirement Reformation, and I start a 4-part series talking about the I Retire for Him book recently released by I Work for Him. This book challenges the standard practices of the average retiree in America and really challenges the everyday retired believer to recognize their worth and what they have to offer this world and the upcoming generations. Today, our focus is on changing the way we think about living out our faith in retirement. This discussion is based on chapters 2 and 3 in the book I Retire for Him, found online at iworkforhim.com/bookstore. Bruce Bruinsma, I'm so excited to have you back on the air with me. Let's get going. Thanks, Bruce.
Oh, I'm excited to be taking this topic and from a fresh perspective that you and Martha and Ted put together in that book. It just, I probably 2 weeks ago, I read it again. I just kind of sat back in my chair and put my feet up and said, let me just absorb what it is, the wisdom that has been put into this book. I've got lots of books of my own, and we talked about so many of these topics. But the way that you presented it, Jim and Martha and with Ted, is just really refreshing. It's fresh, and boy, is it relevant.
Well, thank you, Bruce. I appreciate the compliment. Bruce, did you ever imagine that you'd still have peer pressure in your 80s?
Well, first of all, I wasn't sure I'd ever be here in my 80s. So let's just kind of start with that. And that's probably and for many of us, that's the biggest shock that, oh my goodness, we're still here, or we have an expectation that we will be here. And so, all the issues of our culture continue to be reflected as we age. And so this peer pressure that you ask about, absolutely. I'm always interested and amazed in the form and the shape that peer pressure takes.
Well, we're talking about retirement. And so I'm talking about the peer pressure to think that everybody's retirement should look the same and that the American dream of retirement is, of course, what you should be expected to do. Yet, Bruce, you've been able to brush off a little bit of that peer pressure, haven't you?
Yeah, I for sure have. As a matter of fact, to turn the peer pressure into a connecting moment. Some cases a teaching moment, but certainly a moment of helping to expand the thought process. Because here's what happens, and I get it almost every day. Either aren't you retired yet, or when are you going to retire? And so how we think about retirement then shapes not only our thoughts and our actions, but our responses to those and that peer pressure that's coming at you, kind of like a tsunami, because everybody's thinking that you ought to be doing nothing, perhaps like they're doing nothing.
Well, to make them feel less guilty as well, if you're doing nothing. Isaiah 55:8 and 9 says that God's thoughts are not like our thoughts, and his ways are not like our ways. When it comes to changing our thinking about retirement, what do you think God has in mind when his thoughts may be different than our thoughts?
Well, I think sometimes, as I envision God, sometimes he just puts his head in his hands and goes, "You've got to be kidding me. These people are really not getting it." And so that the understanding of that inherent message that's inherent in I work for him, that's inherent in I retire for him, that's inherent in the Retirement Reformation, is the undergirding, the understanding that in fact God has a plan for our lives, and that plan extends all the way until we die. And there is no retirement in that context. There is just being able to represent him in different ways.
But Bruce, we find so many. I live in Florida, and you now live in one of the newer retirement meccas. You live in Colorado Springs, where they're building 500,000 houses here in the next couple of years. We find that so many retired Christians in America think that the ultimate reality in life is retirement, and further, a retirement of being on vacation all day long, with playing all the time and watching TV and reading books without end, and playing golf and pickleball. Maybe a puzzle here and there, or a crossword puzzle. What kind of reality is that? Because you got friends living that reality.
Absolutely. And so the underlying thought there, and I think it's reflected in your book and the things that we've talked about, is the idea that leisure will have meaning. And what we learn is that leisure has some value. It's good for a game of pickleball. It's great to watch the National Football Championship game. It's fine to take a trip and go visit someplace else. That has value, but it does not have meaning. And when we think about God's plan for our life, it's be able to identify that meaning and the ability to impact others in that process and reflecting him and his values and his thoughts, not ours.
I think it comes down to asking some questions, Bruce, things that we just have to ask ourselves instead of, and we've talked about it on, dozens of shows. Most everybody knows what they're retiring from. Very few know what they're retiring to. I think we got to start asking some questions. And I write about this, what do I love to do? Because some people maybe had a job that they did for 40 years that they didn't love, but they've got something that they love to do, whatever it may be. And they've got to ask themselves, what skills do they have? And how should I invest my time instead of, what am I going to do to play today? How can I invest my time with intentionality? And then to ask themselves, with my unique position in the community where they live, how can they serve it with an example of God's love? When you see retirees, Bruce, ask those questions and seek those answers, what changes?
Well, I think the key word in all of that, and those were good descriptive language, but is the word intentionality. To be able to say, okay, there is something more, and I'm going to persevere, take specific steps to investigate what that is. Now, that investigation, it can be very systematic, it can be very guided, it can be extremely intentional, or it can just simply, let's be aware of the opportunities to impact others' lives that God puts in front of us that bring a passionate response from me. And so intentionality and passion, I think, are two words that are important within that investigation in that context.
And what's fun about the iRetire4Him book is it's not just me pontificating and bloviating, as Rush Limbaugh would say. It's Ted Haynes, Martha's dad, took time in every chapter and wrote his story of what did it look like for him to live out his retirement on the streets of northern Minnesota and South Florida. And that just kind of puts a little bit of meat with the potatoes in this. And we've heard from Ted many times, and it's great that forever the generations will be able to read Ted's words. When we come back, segment 2 today, we're going to be talking with Dr. Jerry White. And then when Bruce and I come back in segment 3, we're really going to be talking about how do we start to put some of this in action? What are some of the ideas? What does it look like to put your faith into action right there in your community? You listen to I Retire for Him. Used to be I Work for Him, but no, we're retired now. Listen to iRetire4Him with your host, Jim Brangenberg, and, of course, the founder of the Retirement Reformation, Bruce Bruinsma. We'll be right back.
The Retirement Reformation wants to come alongside you as you navigate in each stage of your retirement. Our online resources include our blog, our downloadable books, and life planning studies, as well as membership and coaching options. Go to retirementreformation.org and use these resources to begin the transformation of your retirement. Journey from retirement to reformation, so you can say, I retire for Him. That's retirementreformation.org. Now, back to the show.
Hey, welcome back to iRetire4Him. Bruce, every second segment of the show, you bring on a guest that's got a story to share. Who's your guest today?
My guest today is a longtime friend and someone who I've admired and been pleased to work alongside in many areas, Jerry White. And Jerry White has a long and extensive career, both in the military, as head of the Navigators, and all the work that he's done since he has moved from that role with the Navigators. So, Jerry, we're just so pleased that you're with us today. And I wanted to kind of frame our conversation within the context of a conversation that you and I had. Maybe, it may have been as long as 15 years ago.
Right.
And I asked you a question. And the question was, Jerry, when you get asked a question and you really don't have a context for an answer, you don't have an immediate response to that, what goes through your mind and where do you start to be able to respond to whatever that question may be? And so I thought that was a fairly difficult question. And you answered it so simply. You looked at me and you just simply said, Bruce, I always start with Jesus. Good. So, starting with Jesus. Jerry, your career has had lots of transitions in it, a constant kind of a messaging. But as you think about all the things that God has taken you through, give us a context for how you reflect about that, or if you were to share that with one of your grandchildren.
Well, Bruce, thanks. It's good being with you. But last night, Mary and I were reflecting just a little bit on how God has led us. We're just two kids from farm communities in Iowa and Minnesota. We never expected to have the opportunities that we had. And when God led me into the military after my electrical engineering degree at the University of Washington, I expected to go down a path of flying. God didn't have that in plan. He put me into the space program as a mission controller at Cape Canaveral and later at the Air Force Academy to teach astronautics and also to reach out to students and help share Jesus Christ with them. And as you think of all that span of time, I still keep in touch with that astronautics department. A week ago yesterday, I was with the department at the academy. Though I'm retired, I retired, as you know, as a major general in the Air Force. And at the same time, I was leading the Navigators. So we had a very, very complex life. And then all of a sudden, they had this huge, and I mean huge, retirement ceremony for me with the Air Force under the nose of a stealth fighter and the wing of a B-52 bomber at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and all the music and all the stuff. And then all of a sudden, you're done. And nobody even calls you anymore. Oh, yeah, I keep touch. And then, of course, the Navigators went on, and I turned that responsibility over. But the mission never changes. From the very beginning, God spoke to me about sharing my faith with people and to live the life of Christ before my peers. And so today I'm having Bible study with 3 of my peers. And I'll continue doing that. Now, the verse that I have for that is, but seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. What are these things? Well, it's everything in life. And so God has just continued to bless not so much the positions, but the relationships. So you retire, the relationships don't go away, but the responsibilities do. And so through the years, that has been my driving force. Now it's a different world when you don't have to make decisions day by day by day. So today I'll meet with the new U.S. president of the Navigators. I won't tell him what to do, but if he asks me for help, I'll give it. If he doesn't, I won't.
You know, the stages in retirement, and I talk about, you know, the early stage of active application, and you've kind of described that, for example, in almost with the work that you did with the Navigators, and then all the work you've done with other ministries, and then the stage that you're kind of in now is insightful stewardship of willing to share when there is a question asked or when there is a need presented, and then be able to take all that experience and that God has blessed you with through the power of the Holy Spirit to be able to speak into those kinds of issues in relationship. Talk a little bit more about the importance of relationship with you and Mary, for example, and our spouses, how critical that is, and the other relationships that you have.
Well, through the years, the thing that has most motivated us is the friendships that we have, both in the job, but just in our world. And God places us with people. The gospel is for people, not for things, and not even for organizations. So we found that we need to develop the kinds of relationships that provide not only to encourage us, but so we can share with people. And through the years, we've had several kinds. We've had our work relationships, but then we've had our personal relationships. And Bruce, I think you know, we've had a group of 3 other couples that have been meeting together for 40 years in what we call a covenant group. And we're still gathering. Now we gather on Zoom some, but we gather in person. And to help each of us walk with Jesus for a lifetime. The other thing is that once your position goes away, many people don't have any reason to call you. In other words, you can't do anything for them, but they will if they're your friends. And so if you develop the friendship both of believers and non-believers, so our engagement is at both levels, but it takes some effort. I could just withdraw and play handball and take care of things around the house, but I'm not going to do that. And so we initiate being with people, and we have to be available to them. Also, by the way, you have to have something to share, that they need to see something in your life that says, hey, I'd like to have some of that.
Well, I think what underlies that, a word that comes to my mind, is intentionality. Right. And as we grow older, if we are not intentional about either maintaining or expanding those relationships, the world continues to shrink. And when the world shrinks, it always focuses on you rather than on others. And so that intentionality of continuing to expand your relationships and to maintain the ones that you have. And as God calls some of them home, where our world gets smaller in that sense, we go to more funerals. And yet that needs to be expanded and replaced because God's got a call until we are called home. And so how are you finding that?
Well, first of all, a good friend of mine, a Navy captain, it's equivalent of an Air Force colonel that I'm doing Bible study with and helping to walk with Christ, discipling, you might say. He moved out of his position, and he had read something that was very helpful to me because I'm working on a revision of the book Dangers Men Face that I did a number of years ago. And he said, Jerry, you got to put a section in there on the fourth quarter. And he says, in the fourth quarter of life, you have 3 phases. You have the go phase where you still have energy and you want to keep going. And then you have the slow go phase. And finally, you have the no-go phase. I thought that was pretty good. But, okay, eventually things will narrow down, Bruce. And when people say, Jerry, how long are you going to keep going at the pace you're going? So I say 2 things, health and opportunity. And health relates to both my health and my wife's health, Mary's health. And the opportunity is that the doors are still open. I can't do a lot about my health. I can do a lot of things to keep healthy, which I do. But I can do things about opportunity. I can be in a position where I connect.
And as I think about that, Jerry, is being able and willing to step by faith into a new relationship or a new opportunity that God puts in front of us. Because we have a choice every time those are presented. And we can either step forward in faith and see what direction he's going to take that and be willing to go, or we can withdraw and say, well, no, I'm not going to do that. And so how do you make those decisions?
I make the decisions both by how much time I have and who it is that asks me. I can't do everything, but I have to measure my efforts. And when I do that, I pray about it. For instance, it's like fishing. You throw out the bait and you see if a fish grabs on. I'm in conversations and I throw out the bait. Hey, if you'd ever like to talk about some things, let me know. The person may call me, they may not. On the other hand, God will just open up doors, as happened recently. I do a lot of work with the Air Force Association, and our new chaplain is just the retired chief of chaplains of the Air Force. And I'd met him times past. In fact, I briefed him in my office and so forth. But he now is entering this phase. So we're entering into a communication on that.
Well, you're interacting with a really unusual and someone who is really worth your time. He was in a life group that I taught, and when he was at the academy, and so it's wonderful. Also, I'll just share with you, I have one grandson that's in the academy now, and a second one that's going to be coming to the academy next year. So I'm going to have two of them. So at some point, I may come to you and say, just give me some guidance on how to support my grandsons that are at the academy. So that's really an exciting.
And by the academy, all my West Point friends would say, "Oh, you mean West Point?" And I say, "No. I mean the Air Force Academy."
Absolutely.
And so, yes, we surely will do that. And by the way, yesterday or Tuesday, I spent 4 hours with a training program that my youngest grandson is in here in Colorado Springs, a really intensive discipleship program. What a privilege that I was able to go there. And they said, share your story. And then I shared some things on integrity. And so your story still communicates. But by the way, you have to have a story. You need to know Jesus. And many people who retire, yes, they know Jesus, but they haven't gone deep in their life. And if anybody is listening that is retiring and hasn't grown and been discipled, find somebody to disciple you and help you walk with Jesus.
One of the things that we say is that as we grow older, we probably do go downhill physically and perhaps we go downhill a little mentally, but the offsetting opportunities of growing closer to Jesus and in deepening your Christian walk and understanding what that is and how to apply it, and then being able to grow with emotional maturity to be able to deal with difficult subjects that maybe 20, 30 years ago would have thrown you totally off kilter. And now through God's power, you have the ability to speak into them.
No, you do. And one thing I warn people who, after they get over a certain age, I says, one thing you want to be is to be positive. Don't be cynical. Because, and the phrase that I hate, Bruce, has been there, done that. No, you haven't. You have not been in this place before. And we need to be able to encourage the next generation and not saying, oh, we tried that back there and it didn't work. Or to criticize them for whatever they may be thinking. We need to engage with them and affirm them and leave our past behind. Just because we've done something, they have a new world to discover today.
And the paradigm is so different, Jerry, that people are operating in today than when you were operating as a 20 or 30-year-old. I mean, the world's just a different place. But our wisdom still applies. And Jerry White, we're so grateful that you spent time with us today on iRetire4Him. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Blessing to be with you, Jim and Bruce.
All right. We'll be right back with more on iRetire4Him. Hang on. Every iRetire4Him show goes so quickly we don't often get to remind you that there are 2 resources you should be checking out right now. I recommend that you get a copy of the Retirement Reformation book and the iRetire4Him book. Retirement Reformation focuses on the mindset and behavioral changes needed, let's just say paradigm shifting, that is needed to live out your faith in retirement. iRetire4Him is focused on many of the ways you can put your faith into action by investing your life into others in your retirement years. Get both at the Retirement Reformation website in the bookstore, retirementreformation.org. That's retirementreformation.org. Hey, welcome back to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg, and of course, we've got Bruce Bruinsma here, the founder of the Retirement Reformation. Please check us out online, retirementreformation.org, retirementreformation.org. Bruce, that was an incredible conversation with Jerry White, the one of the chairman emeritus of the Navigators, just sharing his story of what it's looked like to live out his faith in his retirement. I just love talking with Jerry. He's just such an encouragement for sure, isn't he?
Oh, he certainly is, and he's a role model for me.
Yeah. Bruce, in all of the books that I released this last year, I write about the power of praying for those who don't know Jesus, who I hang out with all the time and see often. So the people that whether they're in my neighborhood or I work with, or I'm retired next door, or I'm playing with. Why do you think praying for others by name, which is something I specifically state, we need to pray for others by name each and every day. Why do you think praying for people by name is so important and powerful?
I think because it takes that idea of intentionality that we talked about in a prior segment. It takes that intentionality and puts a face on it. When you put a face on it, then there's an emotional context, and the passion that God puts in your heart for, whether it be the salvation or the understanding, the healing, whatever it may be, for the person that you're praying about, that intentionality and that specificity is really important. We know that we understand from Scripture that God understands every hair in our head. When you're talking about you and me,
it's not much
that's
work.
a bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
But when you think about that, it doesn't say he understands and knows all of our scalps. It says our hair, the individual hair, the individual person. And if you just think about the billions of people that are alive in the world, and that God knows each single one of them, when we bring those individuals to his throne through prayer, it not only makes a difference in our relationship with him because of our specificity, but his reception of those prayers and the way that it brings really specific meaning. So praying for people individually. Matter of fact, I'd urge you to go to the website and download PrayerMate. It's a great tool to be able to keep in front of you the specific people or the specific issues that God has put on your heart.
Bruce, one of the things I found when I started praying for people by name is that I don't see them change usually. What I see is my heart towards them changes. I start to see them the way God sees them. And then that changes my attitude towards people, and therefore really opens up the conversation for some more conversation with those people. Bruce, it's a passion of mine, and I write about it a lot in chapter 3 of the book, is that I just want retirees to see value in themselves, because as I see it, they're not wasted, they're not worthless, they're not washed up. They contain an incredible amount of wisdom and experience and talent that the next generations don't have. I mean, take for instance, simple things like, how many of the new generations, the Gen Zers and millennials, know how to use a manual screwdriver? The other day I was working on a piece of furniture, and it had an old flat blade screw from the 50s. And I remember watching my dad go out of flat blade. He didn't care. I can't stand flat blade screws, but my dad knows how to do that. He's 89. He knows how to deal with flat blade screws. Simple things like that. Generations lose. When retired folks die, they take their wisdom, their talent, and their abilities with them. How have you seen the the despondency, the discouragement in retirees when they look at themselves and don't see their value, all that they have gained over their years? What happens?
Well, it's interesting. I think the cultural peer pressure that we talked about before has really inundated older people. And so that idea of do I really have talents and abilities? Is that knowledge of how to handle a flat screw, as you just talked about, is that really important to anyone? And so there's a hesitancy that I see to be able to step into an issue and to speak into it. Even if their experience is unique to it and they have great skill and talent, there's still that hesitancy. And so through the power of the Holy Spirit, to be able to see an opportunity and then be willing to step into it with the wisdom that you have. It doesn't mean that you've lived a perfect life. It doesn't mean that you don't have any issues. It doesn't mean any of those things, but it does mean you can make a difference in someone's life at that specific time in that specific way. And so I encourage all of us to be willing to step into and speak into the issues that God puts in front of us. They don't have to be life-changing, the issues. It's just, I don't know how to use this dumb screwdriver. How do you do it? Everything from there to things that could be, of even greater impact.
Well, and we're going to talk about that in some of the later podcasts as we talk through this 4-part series of iRetire4Him, because I come up with some very specific things, but I just want everybody listening to know you are so valuable. As a retiree, you've got experiences that nobody else has. You've got gifts, talents, and abilities that nobody else has. We need you. We need you to pour those gifts into others. Please shut the TV off, stop playing pickleball and golf and tennis, and start pouring your life into others. There are ways we're going to talk about that on the show over the next several weeks, but please see yourself as so valuable. Bruce, you got tools on the Retirement Reformation website, retirementreformation.org, that can help retirees see value in themselves. Where can they go in order to be able to start getting the wheels to turn about, hey, I'm not done?
One of the things, for example, that I'd recommend they do is, read the book, iRetire4Him. There are questions at the back of each one of those. They're wonderful places to start the process of investigation. In the Retirement Reformation book, we have similar those. We have study guides. And to be able to just to say, God really wants me to be available. Don't shut yourself off, but simply be available. And then you can take intentionality to a whole new level.
Well, and that intentionality really goes on to when you wake up to the reality that as a retiree, you're not done, you're not washed up, the game's not over, that the reality is you've got friends you need to encourage as well. And we encourage all of you to get out of the grandstand and get back on the playing field of life. Maybe you're not going to run the plays anymore, but you can call the plays. You can help support the players that are running, but you've got wisdom that they don't know. Maybe they know how to run fast, but they don't know where to run. And we need you to let's spread the good news that retirement is the end of life. It's the beginning of a whole new section of life that is so important. And Bruce, one final point I want to make sure I brought up that I write about in chapter 3. And this is a lie that was spoken into me, and I want to make sure we speak the truth into everybody. We were told, a lot of us were told when we were younger that when we die, we don't get to take anything with us. There's no U-Haul behind the hearse. But the lie was, we do get to take stuff with us. The lie was that we don't. The truth is, we do get to take stuff with us. Our relationship with our Heavenly Father, which we get to invest in even more deeply in our retired years because we don't have to rush into our car and sit in 2 hours of traffic to get to work. Our relationship with our Heavenly Father, we get to take with us. That goes with our soul when we go to heaven. And that's an investment in eternity. And that's what we have an opportunity to do. And that will also help you see people around you in a better way. What do you think about that, Bruce?
Let me just give you a story of the last few weeks. There's a good friend of ours, and she is in her, probably final month of life. And for the last 6 or 7 years, they have just gone through, unbelievable agony with cancer and just one thing after another. And so everybody is really focused on her. And it occurred to me that one that I really need to care for was my friend. And so I called him and said, "Hey, I'm coming over." "Great. Come over. Let's have a cup of coffee." As we talked, I said, "How are you doing?" And he hemmed and he hawed, and we talked for a little while, and he's under some real emotional stress. He needs space. He needs support, and no one is focused on him. So I said to him, I tell you what, why don't we go out for breakfast on Friday morning? And you should have seen his eyes light up. Wow. So we went out for breakfast on Friday morning, and I got thinking about, you need to be able to have, when you're out for your walk, you need to have some more help, and you can't read a book when you're out for a walk. And so let me get you a subscription that you can listen to books of your choice when you're able to do that. And so I got him that subscription, and tears came to his eyes. And he said, "Wow, this is going to help me to be able to care for my wife during these things and still be emotionally whole." And so just being sensitive to what's there right in front of us, and then just take easy steps that you can take to impact somebody else's life.
Wow.
There's the challenge. Let's be intentional.
And what you did is you noticed, you asked the question, "How you doing?" Or if you're from New York, "How you doing?" And you waited for the answer. And you didn't accept fine as an answer, because fine just means freaked out, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. You wanted to really know. Bruce, great conversation. We got lots more coming up talking about the book, I Retire for Him. You can get a copy online, iworkforhim.com/bookstore, or of course on any Amazon or other online booksellers. You've been listening to I Retire for Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation, with your host, Jim Brangenberg, and of course, Retirement Reformation's founder, Bruce Bruinsma. We're Christ followers journeying on a journey from retirement to reformation, so we can ultimately say, I retire for Him.
Thanks for listening to I Retire for Him with your hosts Jim and Martha Brangenberg and Retirement Reformation founder Bruce Bruinsma. I Retire for Him is the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. Most Christians tend to follow the world's pattern of rest and self-pampering during retirement. However, in your retirement, you can be focused on God's unique call to love, serve, and help others. This can be your best season of life if you take advantage of a life's worth of knowledge and experience and combine it with a greater freedom of time and money and invest it all in the generations both preceding and following you. The Retirement Reformation is encouraging Christians to find and follow God's call in all seasons and aspects of life, especially in retirement. Take time to sign the manifesto at retirementreformation.org and explore the wealth of resources available on our site. Join this movement of God and journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him. Go to retirementreformation.org.